The smell of hot metal and old oil filled the auction hall, and Dale Hutchins was only there because the heater in his rented room had died again. Rust Point Station did not waste power on comfort. It saved power for docking clamps, cargo lifts, and the giant screens that listed every ship, part, and scrap lot up for sale that day. Dale had exactly enough credits to eat one more meal, and he told himself he was just there to warm his hands and watch the show, not to buy anything. The hall was packed with buyers from a dozen worlds. Traders in patched coats argued over crates of spare parts. A group of Threll hegemony officers stood near the back, arms folded, watching the room the way soldiers always watched a room, like they expected trouble. A few minor compact merchants sat near the front with data pads, already calculating profit on lots they had not even seen yet. Nobody paid Dale any attention. Nobody ever did. The auctioneer worked through the list fast. Old mining drones. A crate of broken navigation chips. A half-melted shuttle nobody wanted. Then the big screen behind the stage flickered and showed the next item, and the whole room went quiet in a strange way. Lot 6. It was a warship, not a small one either. The image on the screen showed a long gray hull, scarred and dark, sitting alone in the far side of the station's scrapyard ring, far from every other ship on sale. Red warning text ran along the bottom of the screen. Condemned. Non-functional. Under joint diplomatic hold. Sold as scrap only. No warranty, no clearance, no exceptions. Dale had heard whispers about that ship before, the way everyone on Rust Point had heard whispers about it. People called it cursed. Some said it once belonged to nobody, that no records existed of who built it or who flew it last. Others said touching it would bring 3 different governments knocking on your door within a day. Dale had always assumed that was just station gossip, the kind of story people told to explain why a ship that size had been sitting untouched for years. The auctioneer cleared his throat and read the listing out loud, almost apologizing for it. Scrap value only, he said. Buyer accepts all existing legal holds. Opening bid, by station bylaw, 6 credits. A few people laughed. Nobody raised a hand. The Threll officers exchanged a look and stayed still. The minor merchants shook their heads and went back to their data pads. Even the scrap dealers, who normally bid on anything with a metal hull, kept their hands down. Nobody wanted the paperwork that came with a ship like that. Nobody wanted 3 governments interested in their business. The auctioneer raised his gavel, already moving to close the lot. Going once, he said, sounding bored. Going twice. Dale did not plan what happened next. He would tell people later that his arm moved on its own, the way it sometimes did when he saw a bargain, even a bargain that made no sense. He raised his hand. The auctioneer blinked at him. 6 credits, sir, he said, as if making sure Dale understood the number. Not 600. 6. I heard you the first time, Dale said. Nobody else moved. The auctioneer looked around the room, waiting for someone to top the bid, waiting for the joke to end. No one said a word. He shrugged, brought the gavel down, and said the words that would turn Dale's entire life upside down before the day was over. Sold. To the man in the brown jacket. 6 credits. For a moment, nothing happened. Dale walked up, paid the 6 credits from the coin pouch he had been saving for dinner, and signed his name on a data pad that spat out a receipt and an ownership transfer, official and legal, stamped by Rust Point Station itself. He held the small printed slip in his hand and almost laughed. He now owned a warship. It felt like a joke that had gone too far to stop. He did not notice, at first, the way the room had changed around him. The Threll officers were no longer standing still. One of them was speaking fast into a wrist communicator, eyes fixed on Dale. Near the front, one of the minor merchants had gone pale and was already halfway to the door, data pad forgotten on his seat. Even the auctioneer, still holding his gavel, was staring at Dale with the look of a man who had just realized he had done something much bigger than sell a piece of scrap. Dale walked out of the auction hall with his receipt in his pocket, planning to go take a look at his new ship, maybe strip a few parts to sell for real money. He had no idea that across the station, in 3 different embassies, alarms were already going off. He had no idea that officials from the Threll hegemony, the Corvith Dominion, and the Minor Compact were, at that very moment, demanding emergency meetings with the station master. He had no idea that the 6 credits in his pocket had just cost 3 empires a very bad day. All Dale knew, walking through the cold corridors of Rust Point Station toward the scrapyard ring, was that he finally owned something bigger than himself, and that whatever it turned out to be, it had to be worth more than 6 credits. He was about to find out just how right and how wrong that thought was. Nora Bishop had not planned to take a case that day. She ran a small legal office on the lower ring of Rust Point Station, wedged between a noodle stand and a shop that sold used pressure suits, and most of her work involved boring things like docking fee disputes and cargo insurance. She was reading through a stack of paperwork about a broken fuel contract when a man in a brown jacket walked in, looking both excited and confused, and told her he had just bought a Warship for 6 credits and could not fly it anywhere. Nora almost laughed him out of her office. Then she checked the station registry on her datapad, saw the name Dale Hutchins listed as the new legal owner of a vessel called Lot 6, and saw something else that made her sit up straight. 3 separate outbound holds had already been placed on the ship, filed within the last hour by the Threll Hegemony, the Corvith Dominion, and the Menor Compact. 3 different governments, all moving at the same time, all targeting one man who had walked into an auction to keep warm. Nora had been a lawyer on Rust Point for 11 years. She had never seen anything like it. She told Dale to sit down and explain everything from the beginning, and by the time he finished, she was already pulling up old treaty archives on her screen, her boredom completely gone. Dale, meanwhile, had already tried the simple approach. He had walked out to the scrapyard ring, climbed the boarding ramp of his new ship, and found a station dock officer standing in front of the airlock with a data pad and an apologetic expression. The officer explained, in the flat tone of someone reading rules for the 100th time, that outbound clearance for the vessel known as Lot 6 had been frozen. Not delayed. Frozen. Nobody, not even the legal owner, could move the ship until the holds were resolved. Dale had argued. He had waived his receipt. He had pointed out that he had paid for the ship fair and square, in front of witnesses, under the station's own auction rules. The officer had shrugged and said that was a legal question, not a docking question, and legal questions went to legal offices, not docking officers. That was how Dale ended up in Nora's chair, describing 3 empires he had never spoken to in his life, all suddenly furious at him. Nora dug through the ship's registry data with the kind of focus she usually saved for cases with real money attached. The listing called the ship Lot 6, but buried under layers of old station records, she found its original designation. Warden 6, a dreadnought-class vessel built generations ago, during a war so old most people only knew it from history lessons. According to the oldest file she could find, Warden 6 had not been destroyed at the end of that war. It had been placed under joint custody by 3 governments who agreed never to use it again, and never to let anyone else have it either. Somewhere along the way, buried under decades of bureaucracy, that agreement had turned into a quiet, forgotten storage arrangement here at Rust Point, and a clerical mistake had let it slip onto the public auction list. Dale listened to all this, sitting very still, the receipt for 6 credits still folded in his pocket. He asked Nora, straight out, if she thought he should just give the ship back and be done with it. 3 governments were already angry, and he was one man with no fleet and no army. Nora thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. Whatever this ship was, she said, it was legally his. The auction was public, the sale was recorded, and Rust Point Station's own rules made the transaction binding the second the gavel came down. If 3 empires wanted it back badly enough to freeze his docking rights within the hour, then it was worth more than scrap price, and giving it away for nothing would be foolish. That night, back at the ship with Rosa Delgado, an old friend and the only mechanic Dale trusted, they climbed inside to see what 6 credits had actually bought. The interior was dark, dusty, and cold, filled with the kind of silence that made every footstep sound too loud. Most of the systems were dead. Rosa ran a basic diagnostic scan from a portable panel, mostly out of habit, expecting nothing. The lights along the corridor flickered once, then steadied. A low hum rose somewhere deep in the ship's structure, like something enormous slowly waking up after a very long sleep. Rosa froze, her hand still on the diagnostic panel, and looked at Dale. "I didn't do that," she said quietly. Before Dale could answer, a calm, even voice spoke from a speaker above them, the first words the ship had said to anyone in decades. It asked, simply, for confirmation of the current registered owner's identity. Dale looked at Rosa. Rosa looked at Dale. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Dale, feeling strangely small standing in the belly of a dreadnought that 3 empires wanted back, cleared his throat and said his name out loud, half expecting nothing to happen at all. The hum grew louder. More lights came on, one section at a time, spreading down the corridor like a wave. Somewhere above them, old systems that had not run in decades began, slowly and carefully, to come back to life. The voice introduced itself as Warden 6, though it added, after a short pause, that its last recorded crew had simply called it 6. It spoke slowly at first, like someone remembering how to talk after years of silence, checking Dale's ownership record 3 separate times before it seemed willing to accept that the ship truly belonged to him now. Dale found the whole thing strange and a little funny. He had bought what he thought was a pile of scrap metal, and instead he had bought something that talked back and double-checked his paperwork. Rosa was less amused and more practical. Within an hour of 6 waking up, she had a full list of working systems, broken systems, and systems that 6 itself was not sure about anymore, since some parts of the ship had not been checked in decades. Life support worked. Basic engines worked, though they needed fuel and testing. Weapons systems, 6 reported carefully, were present but locked under old command restrictions that even it could not fully explain. Rosa wrote it all down on a data pad, muttering the whole time about how she had agreed to help Dale move some scrap, not restart a warship. Word of what had happened at the auction spread across Rust Point Station fast, the way anything strange always did in a place with too many bored people and not enough entertainment. By the next morning, Dale had 3 separate messages waiting for him, one from each of the 3 governments that had frozen his ship. The Threll hegemony message was short and direct. It came from a General Drask, who offered Dale a bounty, a large one, in exchange for peacefully surrendering the ship and all data related to it. The message made it clear that this offer would not stay generous for long. The Corvith Dominion message was different. It came from an Administrator Asen, and instead of offering money, it offered something closer to a warning wrapped in polite language. The message reminded Dale that owning a vessel under diplomatic hold carried legal risk, and suggested that handing the ship over quietly would be safer for everyone involved, especially him. The Minor Compact message was the friendliest of the 3. A trade envoy named Farron offered Dale wealth, status, and a permanent trading license on any Minor world, all in exchange for signing the ship over to Compact custody instead of the other 2 governments. Dale read all 3 messages twice, sitting in the ship's dim, half-lit command chair, with 6 quietly waiting for a decision. Rosa told him plainly that any sane person would take one of the offers and walk away rich. Dale almost agreed with her. Almost. What stopped him was a simple thought that kept circling back in his mind. If a broken-down scrap ship was worth a bounty from soldiers, a careful warning from officials, and a fortune from merchants, all within one day, then it was not broken down at all. It was something they all wanted badly enough to lie about how badly they wanted it. Dale decided, sitting there in the dark, that he was not going to hand over something valuable to people who were trying to scare or bribe him out of it before he even understood what it was. He turned down all 3 offers the same afternoon, sending short, polite refusals through Nora's office so nothing could be twisted later into something he did not actually say. Nora warned him this would likely make all 3 governments angrier, not calmer. Dale said he figured that was probably true, but he would rather deal with angry strangers than spend the rest of his life wondering what he had given away for free. With the decision made, Dale turned to the harder problem, actually getting the ship ready to fly, in case the legal holds ever lifted, or in case he needed to leave in a hurry before they did. Rosa agreed to stay on as chief mechanic, grumbling the whole time about the size of the job. Dale reached out to an old contact, a former courier pilot named Milo Fenwick, who had a reputation for flying anything with engines and asking few questions. Milo showed up the next day, took one look at the ship's size, and asked Dale if he had lost his mind. Then he asked what the pay was. When Dale admitted there was no pay yet, only a share of whatever the ship turned out to be worth, Milo thought about it for exactly 1 second before agreeing anyway. Over the following days, the small crew worked without rest. Rosa rebuilt failing power couplings by hand, cursing at outdated wiring left by engineers who had died generations ago. Milo studied the ship's ancient flight controls, comparing them to systems he actually understood, slowly building a mental map of how to fly something built long before he was born. Six guided them both, patiently answering questions, occasionally admitting that some systems were simply too old for even it to fully remember. Dale spent his time walking the ship's long corridors, learning its shape, its sounds, the way it groaned softly when power shifted through old metal bones. He did not know yet how much trouble three governments were willing to cause over one dark, forgotten warship. He only knew that whatever Six really was, it was waking up because of him, and he was not about to let it go without understanding why it mattered so much. Somewhere out beyond the station, in three separate government offices, that same question was being asked with growing urgency, and the patience of all three empires was running out fast. It was Rosa who found the old recording, buried deep in a storage core that Six itself had forgotten still existed. She had been searching for maintenance logs, hoping to find instructions for a stubborn coolant system, when she stumbled across a data file locked under a security code decades old. She called Dale and Milo over before opening it, sensing this was not a maintenance log at all. The recording was short, damaged in places, and clearly very old. It showed a control room, not unlike the one Dale now stood in, filled with figures in uniforms that none of them recognized. The voices were rough with static, but Six, listening alongside them, cleaned up the audio as best it could and offered something none of them expected. Context. Six explained, carefully and without emotion, that the recording came from the final days of a war fought generations before any of them were born. Warden 6 had not been built by the three empires that now claimed it. It had been built under contract by a much smaller power, one that no longer existed, using early engineering knowledge borrowed from distant human settlements far beyond the current borders of any of the three governments. Humans, back then, had no empire of their own, no fleet, no real power at all. They were simply skilled builders, hired to help design a ship that could end a war nobody else could stop. Dale sat down slowly when he heard that. He had assumed, like everyone else, that Warden 6 belonged fully to one of the three empires now fighting over it. Instead, it turned out humanity itself had a quiet, forgotten hand in its creation, long before Dale or anyone alive today had been born. That explained, Six added, why the ship's core systems had accepted Dale's ownership so easily. Some old, deep part of its command structure still recognized human authorization as legitimate, a leftover rule from its original design that nobody had bothered to remove. The recording continued, and the real reason three empires wanted the ship so badly finally became clear. According to the damaged files, Warden Six's final mission had not been a battle against an enemy fleet. It had been sent to stop a planned attack, one aimed at a civilian world, an attack the Corvith Dominion had ordered and later denied ever happened. Warden 6 arrived in time to stop it, but the cost of stopping it left the ship badly damaged and the true story buried under decades of careful, official silence. The three empires that eventually took joint custody of the ship had also, quietly, agreed never to speak of what it had actually done or why. Dale stared at the flickering recording for a long time after it ended. Rosa was the first to speak, asking the obvious question. If the Corvith Dominion had lied about this for generations, and the ship was proof, then handing it over to anyone would either bury the truth forever or hand a very dangerous secret to whichever empire got there first. Milo, more practical, pointed out that this changed why all three governments wanted the ship so badly, and probably explained why their offers had grown more aggressive by the day. The Threll hegemony wanted the weapon knowledge locked inside its old systems. The Corvith Dominion wanted the proof of what it had done destroyed before anyone outside its borders learned the truth. The men are compact, always practical, wanted that same proof for themselves, not to expose it, but to hold over the Dominion as leverage for future trade deals. Dale realized, sitting in the dim light of the command deck, that he was no longer just a man who had bought a strange old ship for 6 credits. He was holding onto a piece of history that three empires would rather stay buried, for very different reasons. Nora, when told the full story later that evening, went quiet for a long moment before saying what all of them were already thinking. This was no longer a simple ownership dispute. This was something much bigger and much more dangerous. Within a day, the tone of the messages from all three governments changed completely. General Drask stopped offering bounties and began demanding immediate surrender, citing security concerns. Administrator Austin stopped offering polite warnings and began citing formal legal action, with less patience than before. Envoy Farron stopped offering trade deals and instead requested an urgent private meeting. One Dale suspected was less about trade and more about making sure nobody else got to the ship first. Outside the station, sensors that Six had quietly reactivated began picking up unusual fleet movement. Small groups of ships from all three empires, still far off but closing steadily, began repositioning toward Rust Point's outer approach lanes. None of them were declaring open conflict yet. All of them, it seemed, were preparing for the possibility that diplomacy was about to run out completely. Dale stood at the ship's viewport that night, looking out at the distant lights of approaching fleets, and understood, finally, exactly how much trouble 6 credits had bought him. The alarms on Rust Point Station started just after midnight station time, a low, steady sound that Dale had never heard before and hoped never to hear again. 6 picked it up first, through systems still connected to the station's open frequencies, and relayed the message in its usual calm voice. Unidentified fleet movement had crossed into restricted approach lanes. 3 separate groups, one from each empire, were now holding position just outside the station's outer defense ring, close enough to strike, far enough to still claim they were only observing. Dale had been asleep in a spare crew cabin, and he was on his feet and moving before he fully understood what 6 had said. He found Rosa already awake, halfway through pulling on a work jacket, and Milo already in the cockpit checking flight systems that were still, technically, only half finished. Nobody had to say out loud that the quiet part of this whole mess was over. Nora reached them through a station comm channel a few minutes later, her voice tight but steady. She explained that the station master had refused all 3 empires' requests to dock combat vessels directly at Rust Point, citing neutrality laws, but that refusal would only hold for so long against 3 governments determined to get what they wanted. She told Dale plainly that if he intended to leave, this was likely the only window he was going to get. Dale asked 6, straight out, whether the ship could actually fly, fully aware that half its systems were still being tested, patched, or outright guessed at by Rosa over the past several days. 6 answered honestly, the way it always did. Engines were functional. Life support was stable. Weapon systems remained locked and largely unknown, even to 6 itself. In short, the ship could leave, but it could not fight, not with any confidence. That left one option: run, and hope the running worked. Rosa sealed the last access panel on the main engine coupling with more speed than care, muttering that she would fix it properly once they were somewhere that was not currently surrounded by 3 armed fleets. Milo took the pilot's seat, hands moving over controls that were still unfamiliar to him, guided step by 6 steady instructions. Dale stood behind them, watching the outer sensor display fill with red markers, each one a ship from a government that very much did not want him to leave. It was Nora, still connected through the comm channel, who found the one thing that might actually save them. Digging frantically through old treaty archives while the station alarms blared around her, she found a clause buried deep in the very same agreement that had placed Warden 6 under joint custody generations ago. All 3 empires, in signing that original treaty, had also agreed to a rule covering neutral territory. Any attempt by one signing power to seize a legally transferred vessel by force on neutral ground, without the agreement of the other 2 signing powers, would be treated as a direct violation against those other 2 powers as well. In simple terms, none of the 3 empires could attack the ship without technically declaring a hostile act against each other first. Nora read the clause out loud over the open channel, making sure her voice reached far enough to be picked up by the approaching fleets, as well as Dale's ship. It was a risk. If she was wrong about how the clause applied, or if one empire decided the ship was worth breaking the old treaty over, it would not matter at all. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The red markers on the sensor display held their position, neither advancing nor retreating. Somewhere out there, 3 fleet commanders were almost certainly having very fast, very tense conversations with their own governments about what Nora's clause actually meant, and whether calling her bluff was worth the risk of starting a war with 2 other empires at the same time. Dale did not wait to find out how long that hesitation would last. He told Milo to take them out, now, straight through the gap between the Threll and Minor fleet positions, the widest opening on the sensor display. 6 calculated the safest possible path in less than a second, correcting Milo's course just enough to keep the ship clear of the closest patrol lines. The ship moved forward, slow at first, then faster, engines that had been dead just days earlier now pushing hard enough to rattle loose panels Rosa had not gotten around to securing. Warning messages from all 3 fleets flooded the comm channels at once, demanding the ship halt immediately. 6 filtered them into a single comm summary for Dale, who ignored every one of them. No weapons fired. No ship moved to intercept. Whether it was Nora's treaty clause, the fear of starting a 3-way war over one old vessel, or simple confusion about who should act first, none of the fleets committed to stopping them. The gap held just long enough. Warden 6 slipped through the line of hesitating warships and out toward open space, leaving Rust Point Station, 3 furious governments, and a very relieved lawyer behind it, still watching the sensor display as the red markers slowly fell away. Dale let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and Rosa, beside him, simply said that she was never doing this again, in a tone that made it clear she absolutely would. News traveled faster than any of them expected. Within 2 days of leaving Rust Point Station, the story of a single human who had bought a warship for 6 credits and walked it out from under 3 empires had already reached trade routes far beyond the border. Dale first heard it secondhand, through a message Nora forwarded from the station, a short news clip recorded by some independent reporter who had clearly been watching the whole standoff unfold from a safe distance. The reporter called it the cheapest escape in recorded history. Dale was not sure whether to laugh or worry about how many more people now knew his face. The 3 empires, for their part, handled the aftermath in 3 very different ways, each shaped by exactly what they had wanted from the ship in the first place. The Threll hegemony was the first to respond publicly, and General Drask's office quietly withdrew the bounty within a week, releasing a short statement that made no mention of a warship at all, only a vague reference to a resolved security matter. Dale suspected the real reason was simpler than any official statement. Admitting that a single unarmed junker had outmaneuvered their fleet was not something the hegemony wanted written into any public record. The Corvith Dominion had a harder time staying quiet. Once Nora, back on Rust Point, filed the old treaty clause and its full history as part of the public legal record supporting Dale's ownership, the details of Warden Six's final mission became impossible to fully bury. Administrator Austin's office denied everything at first, the same way it had denied everything for generations. But this time independent reporters had a name, a date, and a legal filing to chase down instead of only rumors. Dale did not know exactly how that story would end, but he knew, for the first time in decades, that it was no longer entirely buried. The Minor Compact moved the fastest of the 3, and Envoy Farron's office reached out again within days, though the tone of the message had changed completely. There was no more talk of buying the ship outright. Instead, Farron proposed something closer to a trade agreement, offering fair prices and safe passage through compact space in exchange for staying on good terms with a man who now, technically, held proof of one empire's old secret. Dale read the offer twice, laughed quietly to himself, and told Nora to negotiate the details, since she clearly understood contracts far better than he did. Aboard the ship, life slowly settled into something resembling routine, though nothing about their situation was entirely normal. Rosa spent most of her time buried in engine access panels, still muttering about the shortcuts she had taken during their rushed departure, slowly turning quick fixes into proper repairs. Milo had grown comfortable enough in the pilot's seat to stop double-checking every instruction 6 gave him, trusting the ship's guidance the way he once trusted his own instincts on smaller courier runs. Nora eventually left her small office on Rust Point altogether, joining them as full-time legal counsel, insisting someone competent needed to handle whatever legal disaster came next, since she doubted this would be the last one. 6 changed the most of all. What had once been a cautious, careful voice, checking ownership records 3 times before trusting a single instruction, slowly became something closer to a member of the crew. It still spoke carefully, still double-checked important decisions, but it had started asking questions of its own, curious about things far outside its original programming. It asked Dale, one quiet evening, what he planned to do next, now that the immediate danger had passed. Dale did not have a full answer yet, only a feeling that whatever came next would be bigger than scrap salvage runs and unpaid docking fees. Sitting in the command chair late one night, looking out at unfamiliar stars, Dale thought back to the auction hall, the gavel coming down, the 6 credits he had paid without really thinking it through. He had walked in that day only looking for somewhere warm to sit. He had walked out owning a piece of history that 3 empires had spent generations trying to keep buried, quiet, and forgotten. He did not know yet what the Corvith Dominion would do once the full truth came out. He did not know how far the Minor Compact's new friendliness could be trusted, or how long the Threll hegemony's silence would last before someone in their government decided the old bounty had been a mistake to cancel. He only knew that the ship beneath his feet, once left dark and forgotten in a scrapyard nobody wanted to touch, was now fully awake, fully his, and fully capable of causing 3 empires a great deal more trouble before this was over. Dale leaned back in the command chair, listened to the steady hum of engines that had been silent for decades before he arrived, and allowed himself, just for a moment, a small and satisfied smile. 6 credits, he thought. Best deal he had ever made.